Welcome back, everybody. Our second panel for the day is Performance Bodies in Grief. Our moderator for the session is Premjish Achari. Our panelists today are Katia Arfara, Nikhil Chopra, and Zuleikha Chaudhari. I'm just going to shortly read out their bios and then hand over to Premjish. Premjish Achari is a curator and writer. His curations include exhibitions Imperial Silhouettes, Shadows of Sovereignty, Luminous Reveries, and then Inscapes in Search of a Place, Things Vanishing Before Us, and the Students' Biennale for the Kochi Biennale edition. There's a lot of other curations that he's done, but you can read that later. But I'm just going to move to Katia. Katia Arfara is an assistant professor of theater and performance studies at NYU Abu Dhabi and an independent curator. Her scholarship and curatorship focused on migration, ecology, memory, and the politics of representation. Her research appears in Theater Journal, TDR, that's Theater Research International, and Performance Research. Nikhil Chopra. Nikhil Chopra's artistic practice interweaves drawing, live art, photography, sculpture, and installations. His performances dwell on identity and its construction, autobiography and authorship, the pose, and self-portraiture. Nikhil combines everyday life, memory, and collective history, daily acts such as eating, resting, washing, dressing, drawing, and making clothes become the process of making an artwork. And finally, Zuleikha Chaudhari. She's a theater director and lighting designer based in Delhi. Her ongoing research considers the structures and codes of performance, as well as the function and processes of the actor as reality and truth production. 2015 onwards, she's been exploring the framework of law as performance, the role of performance in law, and the performativity of legal truth production. And with this, I hand over to Premjish.
Thank you, Meera. Welcome back, friends and comrades, to the second session of today, Bodies in Grief. And as the incantation led to provocation, we all are awake now. I hope so. But congratulations to the Anant Curatorial Forum for the second year. And thank you for continuing this journey, which is very required, as we also discussed last year, to bring together the wide range of exhibition practices, the expanded exhibition practices, dialogue, discourses in South Asia, and putting them all up together in dialogue and conversation with each other. Our panel, I'll talk about what the panel is about. Bodies in Grief. It's a very depressing, profound title. But thank you, Nikhil. We had initial conversations, and thank you for giving it also a direction which was much needed, that it's not only about bodies that are about performing artists and all. It's about bodies in performance. The bodies under grief, the bodies that include a wide range of bodies, crippled, disabled, and even artist bodies, but normal bodies too. Bodies under torture, bodies under political conflict and situations of despair, mourning, loss, grief, and everything. And we are trying to make sense of all of that today through this session. So the contemporary visual landscape which we see around us is saturated with these kind of images depicting the human body in profound states of despair. And this pervasive imagery compels us to confront a critical question. What is the extent of our capacity for empathy and solidarity when faced with such visible suffering? And how does this relate to direct political action? The very ubiquity of these representations, often disseminated through mass media, paradoxically raises concern about potential desensitization and the erosion of our ability to connect with the pain of others. This panel discussion, Bodies in Grief, seeks to delve into the complex terrain of this last refuge, exploring what transpires within the grieving body when it is subjected to conditions of profound loss, pervasive hopelessness, and seemingly unending torment. Our exploration will be guided by the understanding that the body is not a neutral entity, but is instead shaped, understood, and expressed through a multitude of often conflicting frameworks. Traditional dichotomies, such as the separation of mind and body or mind and matter, have historically positioned the physical realm, including the body and the natural world, as passive and available for manipulation. This panel aims to move beyond these limiting binaries, fostering a renewed focus on the interconnectedness of body and performance in engaging with powerful emotions like grief and desire. To navigate these intricate issues, we are honored to have three distinguished panelists whose artistic practice offers unique perspectives on the embodied experience of grief and its relationship to performance and political consciousness. I'm thankful to Nikhil Chopra, Zuleikha Chaudhari, and Katia Arfara for joining us in this panel discussion today. And as I mentioned earlier, the preliminary discussions with the panelists have highlighted the importance of shifting our focus from the finished product, the bodies of performance art, to the process itself, to the bodies in performing the creative act. And this perspective emphasizes the lived experiences, vulnerabilities, and emotional labor undertaken by the artists as they grapple with themes of grief and loss. It acknowledges the profound physical and emotional toll that engaging with such intense subject matter can entail. By centering the body in the act, we recognize the artist's embodied experience as an intrinsic and inseparable part of the artwork, rather than treating the body as a mere instrument or object of representation. This allows for a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the personal investment and potential suffering inherent in the artistic exploration of grief. The panelists also underscored the need to consider the expansive possibilities of both body and performance, urging us to engage with concepts of presence, time, body, and embodiment, and making the body as archives. And thank you, Katia and Zuleikha, for those insights. This perspective highlights the unique potential of performance art to explore grief in unconventional and deeply profound ways, utilizing the body's presence in time and space to create a living and breathing archive of emotional experience. So I request who would like to go first? There was a confusion. Let's start alphabetically.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yes. Nikhil, you may go if you honor the pact.
Otherwise, I can just go on. On the 9th of December, 1999, at 5 a.m., I was, of course, in bed with my girlfriend. And my phone rang. I was in the United States. And I picked it up with a sense of unease. And on the other side of the call was my uncle, who bore the news that my sister died in a car crash. And a certain sense of disbelief entered me. And I guess it was that moment that completely defined who I was and who I will be. So I just want to say thank you, Meera. Thank you, Mamta. I don't usually talk about this. I don't talk about my grief from a specific place, because otherwise how do we get objective distance to have a critical conversation without you feeling like you're going to offend me? Thank you for offering that space for me to have this conversation for the first time, actually, in a public context. So it's with that heaviness that I search for lightness, the lightness of being, the breath of life, and the viscerality of what it means to be alive. And it is perhaps for this reason that I put my body really at the center of making, the center of my subject. I make it my object, and I use the framework, the makeup of skin, bone, blood, flesh, breath, fluids, as my tool, as my palette, as my canvas. So in 2005, when I was actually able to return to India after an education in the United States, as I had not been able to be part of my sister's funeral, as I was studying at the time, I felt that I needed to have a really corporeal experience, an experience that was missing, actually. This feeling of saying goodbye didn't exist in my life. It was just a phone call. And in some sense, it felt fictional in a sense. And sometimes, fiction is more real than real. So in order to conquer myself, I decided to adorn, in a sense, a fictitious character that I created, somewhere sandwiched between a ruler and a subject. I was interested at the time looking at British imperial photography and the photographs of Indian dignitaries where they signed their allegiance to the British crown on their photographs. And to me, that was an interesting clue of how, in a sense, we all find ourselves somewhere sandwiched between ruler and subject, and how we negotiate our lives in that state, in that balance. I called up my best friend Munir Kabani, who's an amazing photographer, and I said, hey, listen, do you want to go back to Kashmir? Since I'm from there, and hadn't been back for many, many years, as my grandparents' home was burnt, and we were one of the first families that were asked to leave Kashmir, and I sort of felt like I had to go back to this place, and I had to kind of sort of reimagine my relationship with the place that was no more in a sense mine. And I didn't feel, and I felt quite alienated because, I had spent so many years of my childhood growing up here. So, inventing Sir Raja was important, but also kind of personalizing that was even more important, which is when I created Yogaraj Chitrakar, a character that has been part of my kind of artistic, oeuvre and repertoire, where I take Yogaraj Chitrakar, a character based on my grandfather, who used to be a painter, the landscape painter of Kashmir and in Kashmir, and I sort of take myself into Lal Chowk. And this was really, in a sense, a part of an international residency that I was invited to. I'm finding it hard to pause this and sort of move slide to slide. Okay. It's not doing it for me. 1 second. Okay, I guess I'll just keep dancing back and forth. And it was here that sort of my relationship to performance sort of becomes clear. If we're talking about grief, in a sense, this was a way for me to grieve, in a sense of loss, but also to kind of critically examine my relationship to the valley and our family's relationship to the valley, and say, why were we the families that were asked to leave? And then sort of the penny drops, and I sort of realized that, well, we were really essentially the colonizers of the valley. We were, of course, subjects of the Maharaja, but we were employed to rule the state, and to run the state for the Maharaja. And, in a sense, we kind of came with a certain sense of entitlement, and my grandparents were, my grandfathers were, and his fathers were all educated in Oxford and Cambridge. He went to Goldsmiths College of Art in London. So they were all kind of being groomed, in a sense, to emulate or perform the colonizers exactly the way in which the British did, So it was, in a sense, kind of walking out as, in the guise of, let's say, my grandfather, who, taking clues from costumes and from photographs that I had of him from the 1930s, and sort of made the +4s and the tweed jacket and the hat, really allowed me to kind of understand what and where my body comes from, and what is it that I can do with it to understand sort of the extent of not just, let's just say, damage, but also how do I kind of recreate my relationship with not just my body, but also the landscape that it occupies. And how do I kind of reconstruct that narrative for me and where do I kind of stop that pattern so that my children and, don't inherit, in a sense, that baggage, So in a sense, the act of performing is also in a way a process of shedding that baggage by acknowledging it. What happened in this chalk was a crackdown happened, and the army sealed sort of both ends of the road. Everyone was frisked. I would have never gone out into Lal Chowk and carried out such a dangerous piece. I did it only because I was advised by the students of the College of Music and Fine Arts, Kashmiri students, saying, "Sir, you have to go out to Lal Chowk and do this." And I was like, "Are you crazy?" Like, no, they said, "No, we're not. We're in fact want you to do this," right? And so I sort of felt like I was sort of having a cathartic moment, not just for myself, but for a lot of young people and the new generation of artists that could see that this was perhaps a tool for us to sort of gain agency and take control. And for that 1 hour, literally for that 1 hour, we were all able to have our moment with Lal Chowk, And as you know, Lal Chowk is a very fraught sort of market square in the middle of Srinagar. The government of India makes it a point to hoist the Indian flag over there and stake its claim on it. But what Yogra Chitrakar did, and as a traveler and as a wanderer that I like to position myself as, I was invited, and wherever I was invited, I took this persona with me. And I was able to kind of, activate places like Venice, that were way safer than Lal Chowk. But what Lal Chowk gave me was this understanding that there is no such thing as a passive audience. Every single one of you here is performing an active role of sitting down. Every one of yours gaze upon me and upon the screen as I present to you is active. It's not passive at all. And so I became very, very aware that, the students pretended to be journalists. The army made sure that everyone was safe. The police made sure that everyone was safe. And as they found that there was no reason for them to be kind of paranoid, they opened the roads up and all the people came right back to see the performance to its end. Just as much as I'm interested in performing in interesting and exciting institutional sort of situations like the Venice Biennale, I'm also really interested in sort of breaking those walls, right? Because of institutions and sort of imagining bodies and architecture as permeable, windows as eyes, doors as mouths. And I kind of really wanted to also sort of examine my relationship as the wanderer, as the flaneur. To put myself in an uncomfortable position was really important as well as a performer. If I am indeed thinking about using this material as a way to grieve and to resolve my relationship with life, right? My relationship also to cross-dressing, which comes up in Katia's presentation, was not to, in a sense, kind of trouble my relationship with sexuality, but it was really about my understanding of my relationship to masculinity, and it was really important for me to engender myself. So there's also that sense of mourning, of letting myself go as a man. But also there was this need to find the image of my sister, because we kind of looked alike. And, when I wore a wig for the first time in Delhi, actually, in Coach, many, many years ago, 20 years ago to the date almost, that I kind of, for the first time, saw myself in a mirror, but that happened in a public situation. I'm not somebody who tries wigs on in the privacy of my bathroom. But, I was really able to kind of, for a flash of a second, I remember Inder in the audience also, us interacting, even through that performance space, and Inder giving me his thumbs up, was really important, because for just that one moment, I felt that, I could see her in me, And I think that's what loss does, right? We kind of absorb into our bodies the people that we lose, and we become them, right? So in a sense, my body is not just mine, it's mine and my sister's, And the memory of her is really now become a part of my cell and muscle memory. So actually, I'm glad they're just going, because we can always have something fresh to look at on the screen. But in 2011 and 12, I was invited by Freie Universität in Berlin to do a residency and a sort of a fellowship where I was asked to look at my practice as research. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not an academic. And they were like, no, we're not interested in that approach to your research. We're interested in how practice is we can look at practice as research. And I was like, wow, hallelujah, what a liberation and a liberating feeling to not be bound by, let's say, the shackles of academia. This is really a place where I got to use my time, and I kind of rented a studio that was actually a secondhand clothes shop, and it was a space for me not just to kind of exercise or exorcise. Shraddha and I were having a conversation yesterday about exorcism, but it was a place for me to kind of invite collaborators, and in this case, I invited a Buto performer, Yuko Kaseki, who I still have an incredible relationship with. We still collaborate, we still make work together, and we still mourn through our practices together. Buto is a form of catharsis and a form of mourning. It reflects Japan's relationship to not just, kind of rigidness and, being conforming to Japanese culture. This is a dance form and a form of expression which aims to break that, and I think what we both enjoyed was this idea of breakage in a time of loss. It's also the loss, it's also Berlin, right, which is also an extremely heavy place to be in. It's also Japan and Japanese culture, which is also heavy. And it's also by being South Asian is also pretty darn heavy. But there was a sense of humor and a sense of lightness in the way in which we interacted with each other for minutes. That made this really, an experience that really, I guess changed both of us. Anything that I did, any drawing that I made on the wall, Yuko would destroy. Anything that Yuko would do, I would interrupt. So it was also about disrupting each other and kind of interrupting each other. I wasn't satisfied with Grunthaler 9, the space that I set up for performance, because it was something that I did in Germany, and while I really enjoyed my year and a half there, and actually Grunthaler 9 is a space that still exists. It's still a space where performances are carried out. It's still run as a dance studio. So you don't know what kind of a monster you create when you create one. But so I really needed to bring those ideas back home, and at this point, home became Goa, because Goa sort of felt in 2012 like it was the Berlin of South Asia. It was a lot of space. It was the electronic and party capital of the country. And it was not so much the partying that I was interested in. I was interested in a sense of liberty and non-judgmentalness that came with being in Goa. Okay, fine. Yeah, I do enjoy the parties. But, it's also just the ability to be able to have difficult and conversations and be punk and alternative and be underground and, use your means and your practice as a form of resistance, And so we created a space together with a bunch of artists called HH Art Spaces. And HH Art Spaces has now become an animal of its own. Together we're, as it's now not a secret anymore, that together we're curating the next Kochi Biennial. I won't talk much about that, but I will talk about the fact that I'm really interested in sustained engagements with places. And I've been engaging with the Biennial almost since its inception. And this will be like the fourth interaction with the 6 of the biennials that will have happened. We're also really interested in breaking, in a sense, just boundaries, not just boundaries between material and mediums and disciplines, but boundaries between nations and states. We're really interested in asking the question about what does it mean to be South Asian as opposed to Indian, because being Indian is actually really limiting. So we're really interested in bringing to the mix Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal are really very much a part of our sisterhood that we're really interested in, right? And that's a lot of the work that we do. But we often use this space also for ourselves, right? It's not just about curating, but about co-creating and co-making, right? And that's why we place and implicate our own bodies into the mix, right? So we use our space for our own practice, right? That's why we are artists before we are anything else, right? And I guess I will always be one, right? I even though I've been given this mantle to become a curator or to think about my practice as a curator, at the core is the only one way I know how to approach this is to approach this from the position of an artist. But these are some of the projects that we've done at AHH Art Spaces. We've challenged the notion of what it means to be in a Goa that's changing so fast. There's Yuko again with me. There's Mashsoom Chishti, who created this amazing box in which he buries himself. Pedagogy is a very important tool. It's going into academies and kind of in sort of initiating young artists and their bodies into thinking through themselves performatively and placing their bodies at the center of making. Okay, very quickly, quick. Drawing a line through landscapes, a project I did for Documenta. And I'll end with the project I did with Kochi. And this moment is really important. I really wanted to show this slide because, this is a moment that I shared with Vivan, and it was really an electric moment for me. It is why I make the work I make, because we can look at each other intergenerationally, and I still mourn his loss, and I still remember him very, very dearly as someone who really inspired me as a young artist. So I carry that body with me as well, and in me as well. And so, as a kind of pathetic Spanish conquistador with a clown face and pink cheeks, I leave the Biennale site mourning and crying and weeping and rubbing my nose on the ground and getting onto a boat and saying goodbye. But it's not really goodbye, it's more like hello. So with that, I want to say thanks.
Thank you, Nikhil. Zuleikha, please.
Thank you, Anant, Curatorial, Mamta, Meera, and the team for the invitation and for the hospitality. It's also a pleasure to be here with Katia and Nikhil and Premjish. I'm going to begin by reading from Edward Gordon Craig's manifesto called The Actor and the Uber Marionette. Craig was a British scenographer, director, theoretician, and author, also artist and actor. This text was published in his magazine, The Mask, in 1808. Acting is not an art. It is therefore incorrect to speak of the actor as an artist, for accident is the enemy of the artist. Art is the exact antithesis of pandemonium, and pandemonium is created by the tumbling together of many accidents. Art arrives only by design. Therefore, in order to make any work of art, it is clear we may only work in those materials with which we can calculate. Man is not one of those materials. The whole nature of man tends towards freedom. He therefore carries the proof in his own person that as material for the theater, he is useless. I'm going to speak about Untitled Trilogy. Untitled Trilogy comprises the staging of a historical trial that took place in pre-independent India, an enactment of a post-independence People's Tribunal, and a theater text that contemplates an alternate national future. I consider that theatrical performance is not simply an output of Untitled Trilogy, but a method of investigation taking the form of public rehearsals. In the context of performance, a rehearsal is repetition. This means continual reproduction in order to represent reality. While the forensic experiment promises to contain truth within what Bachelard calls circuits of knowledge, can the rehearsal, with its untidy process of thought and consideration, with its related notions of contingency, interruption, uncertainty, version, repetition, and failure be considered the artistic experiment of truth as something dynamic, constructed, contested, asserted, fought over, and interrogated. Truth is not lying in wait to be identified and decoded by those with the skills to do so, but is formed by endeavors to make sense. I am currently in the middle of public rehearsals 7, 8, and 9 at a residency pertaining to part 3 of the trilogy, Saeed Naqvi's 2022 play, The Muslim Vanishes, and I was hoping to speak about that today, but I've only managed to have one of these three public rehearsals, and therefore I really don't feel I'm in a position to talk about part 3. So I will speak about part 1, restaging the trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar, 1858, which unfolded as public rehearsals 3 to 6 at Black Box, Okhla, New Delhi, from December 2023 to May 2024. In 1857, in a popular uprising, several regiments of the East India Company rebelled against the company and installed the aged Mughal poet king Bahadur Shah Zafar as their ruler. While the uprising still swirled in other parts of the country, Zafar was swiftly captured and subsequently put on trial at his own imperial palace, the Red Fort in Delhi. The trial paved the way for India to be officially placed directly under the British Crown a few months later. Denied proper legal counsel, Zafar was soon found guilty of heading an international Musalman or Muslim conspiracy to wage war against the state and commit treason against the British government in India, and was exiled to Burma, now Myanmar. Zafar's trial was staged to portray a commitment to the ideas of rule of law and due process when neither were actually followed. Though the legitimacy of Zafar's trial has been heavily questioned and criticized, not least because the East India Company had been formally operating in India as vassals of the Mughal state, the trial's guilty verdict and the subsequent banishment of the old emperor ushered in a new sovereign in India and thus created a new constituent power which ex post facto legitimized the trial itself. This trial then can be viewed as a foundational moment of formal colonial Indian legal history. Zafar's historic trial, standing as it does at the cusp of the Mughal and British colonial regimes, reveals the clash between two very different political worldviews and epistemes. If we place the trial of the last Mughal emperor by the East India Company as the key event that helped establish the official colonial legal system in India, how can the deconstruction of this foundational event help us to decolonize how the law is structured, understood, and practiced in India today? What does this decolonization reveal to us about sectarian and other hierarchies that are produced and maintained by the law and remain integral to its functioning, especially the colonial and post-colonial Indian states' perception of Muslim subjects, about who can access the courtroom, what constitutes evidence, and what justice may entail? Historically, trials are staged events. They employ dramaturgic elements and theatrical devices. They have their peculiar scenography, their scripts, roles assigned to each specific actor. Trials also have their audience, composed of the public, the media, and their critics. All legal trials have a complex relation to memory. Here, disputing stories are told, relying on the memory of victims, perpetrators, and witnesses to tell their stories. But the narrative accepted as the real version is the one based on the court's perception of the truth of past events, which is rooted in the organization and interpretation of evidence, an accumulation of documents, photographs, witness testimonies, and other texts, which together form the legal archive or the official historical record. While all legal trials, from the most mundane to the most sensational, create the legitimate historical record of the disputed event by giving it the sanction of law, Political trials are political theatre, which not only seek to have a legal impact, but also an emotional one, shaping the memory of the intended audience. The legal event of Zafar's trial is therefore useful for thinking about the relationship between theatre, law, politics, and historiography. Public Rehearsal 3 with Rehan Engineer and lawyers Aditya Sondhi and Shahrukh Alam was a rehearsal of the prosecutor Major F.J. Harriot's opening and closing statements in Bahadur Shah Zafar's trial, which hold as central pivots to a series of intertwined questions, one of which is, in what ways did this trial help to construct the continuing political idea of the Muslim other, who came to be personified by Zafar, casting this other at once as the subject of the state and thus amenable to stand trial, but also at all times the treacherous outsider, intrinsically disloyal to the same state. The lawyers Aditya and Shahrukh considered whether the trial of Zafar continues to be relevant to the nature of the Indian penal structure as it paved the way for the colonial Indian Penal Code to be introduced in 1860, most of whose provisions remain in place in post-independent India and continue and expand in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita or the Indian Judicial Code 2023. In order to make sense of the interpenetrations of law, politics, and violence, can one look away from law's instrumentality, an instrument of political violence, or as seen as an instrument to contain political violence, to its performativity? Can performativity be helpful both for rethinking the role of performance in trials and for understanding the various ways in which violence is addressed, negotiated, transformed, reenacted, and perpetuated through legal proceedings? Public Rehearsal 4 with actor and artist Shuddhabrata Sengupta and actor and filmmaker Ashwin Kumar rehearsed Bahadur Shah Zafar's defense statement at the end of his trial, which was read out by prosecutor Major F.J. Harriot in translation from Hindustani. What was Zafar's narrative of the events? Public Rehearsal 5 with legal scholar Ramya Bodupalli and lawyer Harish Mehla deconstructed the trial, examining who Major F.J. Harriot, the prosecutor, was and how he used the law in the trial. Harish proposed closing arguments with reference to the original trial proceedings and evidence on behalf of Bahadur Shah Zafar's lawyer, Ghulam Abbas, who did not give an opening or closing statement in the original trial. Was the East India Company right in trying Zafar as a subject of the British government in India, or did they in fact owe allegiance to him as his vassals? At the center of Public Rehearsal 6 were the defense statements of Bahadur Shah Zafar, an audition with Sudhanva Deshpande, and prosecutor Major F.J. Harriot's closing arguments from the original trial transcript performed by actor Rehan Engineer. The rehearsal bracketed this archival material by proposing opening and closing statements for Zafar's lawyer Ghulam Abbas, as well as imagining alternate cross-examinations of two key witnesses in the trial. Produced by lawyers Shahrukh and Harish, the central focus of the statements were: how does the state reshape the law through language used in legal arguments and redefine political mobilization and dissent as attacks on the sovereignty and integrity of the nation? This is an audition for the part of Bahadur Shah Zafar on the 21st and last day of his trial, using the translation from Hindustani of the written defense put in by him, the ex-king of Delhi. The court is assembled in the special hall of audience, Diwan-e-Khas, at the Red Fort Palace at Delhi at 11 o'clock in the morning of 9th March 1858. In this audition, I will be playing the part of Zuleikha Chaudhari and the part of the actor will be performed by the audition.
Mustard was blooming on the barricades. Marigolds were dancing on the borders. The kernels of maize had found carnal desire in the alliance of bodies, full of red and green, yellow and cream, in orange and black. We were back. The protest brought back a full-blown smile on the faces that the state had stolen from us. We marched. We marched from Amritsar, Jalandhar, Patiala, Moga, Tarantaran. We came marching like the march of the forest in Macbeth. As Vernon Wood had marched to Dunsinane Hill, the paddy field marched to Raisina. It was an exchange of roses and marigolds on the borders. Red meant orange and green meant blue. Paddy fields danced with water cannons and bodies with patrons. We came marching with banners and flags, with legs and lads, in pagri, in shalwar, in pajama and turra. We came marching on the rhythm of the gitta and the hangla, on the rhythm of the nagara. We were determined to reach there. They tried to crush us. They tried to cut the blossoming flowers as they did with the Muslim protesters in Shaheen Bagh. We came prepared to celebrate Baisakhi and Holi in their time. Covered in green and yellow, we marched as fields were marching. We marched as crops were marching. We marched as wheat was marching. We marched as soil and sweat were marching. Pulsating in our bodies, pulses came marching. Gram secured its nose and marched. With a torn belly, wheat joked to bajra. What else can they do to me? In the wee hours, we marched like butterflies. At night, we marched like fireflies. At noon, we marched with the sun. In the evening, we marched with the moon.
So, what was it like to be there that day?
Every pore of my body was open.
Why did you join the protest?
Because those who produce the food that I eat were marching in protest.
So, why do you think we can rely on your memory of that day?
Because it is the memory of the millions, not the minions.
So, do you think there is an art to protesting?
I don't romanticize these things.
So, your answer is?
Protest doesn't just stem from nowhere. It takes a lot of people to make it happen. They come together, they organize, they talk about things. You say it's an art, but it's a lot of labor.
So, can I ask you what is your name?
My name is Sudhanva.
How old are you?
I'm 56 years old.
Where were you born?
In this city, in Delhi.
What is your religion?
I don't believe in God.
Would you consider yourself to be a good person?
On balance, yes.
Have you ever broken a law?
Oh, many times.
So can a good person break laws?
Of course. If the laws are bad, then a good person will break them.
Have you ever lied to anyone?
Yes.
What is your occupation?
I'm an actor, but currently I feel like I'm being looked at as a criminal.
It's an audition.
It feels like a trial.
So how would you describe your physical appearance?
I'm a male of medium height, 5 feet 6 inches tall, of wheatish complexion, as they say in those ads for identifying the dead, unidentified bodies. These things out, wheatish complexion. A male of in his mid-50s, neither fat nor thin, with white hair. Some places on the head.
So you're auditioning for the part of Achari. Do you think you need to look Muslim to play the part of Zafar?
I'm an actor and I've played many parts in the past. I've generally not paid much attention to whether I need to look Muslim or Hindu or I don't know what it means to look Muslim. I'm wondering whether some of the actors that I admire look Muslim. And I'm wondering whether they would be able to audition for this part.
So your answer is?
I think I have the skills to play Bahadurshah.
What role did you play in the protest that day? Like the forensic, theatre is an art of enabling things to appear by speaking for them. Both the theatrical and forensic method make human behavior the object of inquiry. Both treat their subjects as evidence. Character, in both contexts, affirms the evidentiary principle. By the demonstration of a person's actions, we come to know them. In theatre, this often entails a slippage of positions as a performer stands in for a character. Central to the public rehearsals are auditions. An audition is typically an introduction where an actor has to present a self-portrait as well as his technique and ability to become someone else. The representation is real and staged at the same time. Is it really his story? Is he really an actor? Is this really an audition? The scenario is ambiguous. It produces an ambiguous, unreliable witness and an unbelievable and an unreliable reality. Believability in the context of theatre is credibility in the context of the law, where the production of reality relies on the plausibility of a narrative and the assumption of a stable and consistent identity of the witness. The audition centralizes the actor as witness, focusing on subjectivity and partiality and the entwinement of the fictional and the actual. Can doubt be considered not as contamination, but as necessary friction between that which is scientifically corroborated, factual, and objective, and a personal or narrative truth, or a social truth constructed through debate and discussion of facts on a collective level, or a restorative truth which places established facts in context in an attempt to acknowledge individual experiences? If witnessing is always partial, is it possible to determine what truly happened from within the contradictions and different perspectives, not only between a state and its citizens, but between different communities, within different groups, and even within individual testimonies? Thank you.
Thank you, Zuleikha. I'll start with a question for individually for the three of you, and then we can open it up for the audience. To you, Katia, because you were referring about this in-betweenness, the space of in-betweenness, especially the relevance of that space when we are caught up in these binaries of softness, weakness, masculinity, femininity, and all. I also wanted to, I'm also skeptical of that in the sense, because do you think that it leads to this essentialized, the idea of softness, relating it to femininity? Or could you elaborate on this in-betweenness, like what are the other spaces and options apart from the, what do you call this, femininity, masculinity binaries and all? Like what does this in-betweenness entail? Is it really tapping into only the femininity? Because if we are talking about an emancipatory body, then it should also not be, from a queer perspective also, it should not be that feminized only, right? Is what I'm trying to think.
Yes, thanks for the question and trying to summarize also what this panel. I think that this in between is somehow is critical in something that we discussed a lot also yesterday. These efforts to demonumentalize this, spectacularize art in the Gulf, because we had a lot of, but also the body in the space, either in the desert or the sea or any other landscape, because we had in the previous years what I experienced, and I try to briefly introduce here, but I don't know how much we are familiar with artists from the peninsula, is that there were always attempts to somehow articulate a nation-driven narrative through the presence of the body in different kind of emblematic or spaces, locations, for example in the UAE. So I found it fascinating that this in-between-us, in the case of these two artists, it's not, the purpose is not just to, as you said, to blur these kind of binaries between masculine and feminine, but I would say more essentially to blur this kind of connection of performance art with as part of this national-driven mainstream narratives. And in a way, there's a lot of effort also in the peninsula, have kind of very soft borders in reality, but there is a lot of effort to construct this kind of national authentic heritage. And public art and performance as well somehow contribute to this kind of national-driven efforts. So I found this claim by Monira, who is a kind of already present since a few years, but also Sarah Brahim, who is a kind of newest, younger generation of artists. They try somehow to go beyond these narratives, and they don't characterize themselves as women artists, for example, or Kuwaiti artists or Saudi artists. So they try to go beyond these national attributes, and that's why I try to speak a little about the softness and hardness of the nation. Is not, and this blurring of boundaries is not about sexuality, as you said. It's not about questioning their own gender identities, but somehow questioning the politics of representation of these identities. Yeah.
Thank you. To Nikhil, you delved on embodying historical frames, also fictional subjects or fictional figures, and also taking us through the paradox of being in the dual position of subject and ruler, right? While also traversing landscapes, and you have inhabited various landscapes. So how do you perceive body as a site of historical memory or an archive in a dialectical relation between collective loss and also personal loss in relation to mourning also, which you also articulated? And this presentation was also like that. There was a personal event to it.
Well, I just have to say that this has been one of the hardest presentations I've done, because I usually try to move a little away from it being personal, because I'm really interested in having a critical conversation. And the way in which I can have a critical conversation, I feel, is to draw attention to the fact that actually we don't need to apologize to each other for the losses that we feel in each other. I think we just need to be in solidarity with each other as bodies that mourn together, because not a single one of us in this audience is exempt, in a sense, of loss and trauma. I think that's part of the human narrative. And in a sense, my intention here is to string a thread that runs through all of us so that we are able to come to a table and together find resolve, which is why I'm really interested in this idea of fictionalizing, because through that, I'm able to have those difficult conversations and be able to get objective distance from things that may seem extremely personal. But at the end of the day, I think they are everyone's problem. I do think about how, in a sense, micro narratives, in a sense, lead to macro narratives, or how, in a sense, personal choices that we make, right from choosing a plastic straw over a paper straw, actually has repercussions that, we all will have to face someday. So I am really interested in kind of making it everyone's problem. And that's how I feel I find kind of answers, not necessarily answers, but I'm able to add questions to questions, and kind of expand in the experience of what it means to be human.
Thank you. Zuleikha, you have also mentioned about the specific epistemic context of the law, the violence within the law, the violence that makes the law also. So considering that law is a system of constructing and interpreting narratives within specific spatial and social contexts, so how do you see the parallels between your artistic exploration of space, history, narratives, and the legal framework's approach to constructing truth and justice, especially considering that political events that law attempts to address?
I think in part, or for most part, the question is, I'd like to answer by actually repeating what you said, which is that it is about construction. And for me, I got interested in the law as part of a project 15 years ago. But what began to interest me as I went along through the first trial projects was that it is about the construction of narratives, that it is about, we assume something, it is to think about what is the truth. And that too is a construction which you see always in the context of the law. I think for me, one of the interesting things has become the audition. Because as Sudhanva rightly said, it parallels a cross-examination, whereas actually it is also very much about an audition. That is exactly what happens in an audition. You are asked to speak of yourself, but you're also asked to speak of different, in the context of the theater, it is about actor and character. In the context of the law, it is that you're always being asked to frame yourself and narrativize yourself and produce yourself within a very specific context.
And same in the case of theater too.
Yes, that is why the cross-examination and the auditions for me overlap, because this is where it comes together, where it could be, so was what I did with Sudhanva rehearsed? Did he already have a script? Was it real? I mean, did it happen in the moment? Is as much of a question as anything within the context of a trial or law, and that is what is interesting. Justice must, the question of justice is done, also is justice must be seen to be done. And in that is the question of its performance and performativity. And with the question of performativity is how we see violence in the law. What kind of violence does law do in different ways?
Yeah.
And
That
is
was
there
quite
a
evident,
possibility also within that proceeding, within the law, which is what my interest in the trials is, to understand, although I must say by now to some degree of failure, is to understand at some level, is to understand that within this framework, law always has the idea, it looks forward, the precedent looks forward, but it also is about history. But this kind of a negotiation is interesting because it means that there's space for something to move and change, which too I feel that theatre is about. It's about a potentiality of what can be, of what should be. But how does, I think both forms maneuver very minutely in a very tight space to find that loophole of interpretation, particularly with the law.
Just two couplets.
Very
by
quickly,
Baha
very
Shah
quickly.
Zafar,
Yeah.
if you permit me. बात करनी मुझे मुश्किल कभी ऐसी तो ना थी, बात करनी मुझे मुश्किल कभी ऐसी तो ना थी, जैसी अब है तेरी महफिल कभी ऐसी तो न थी, बात करनी ले गया छीन के कौन आज तेरा सब्रो करार, बेकरारी कभी ए दिल कभी ऐसी तो न थी, बात करनी. Thank you.
So thank you. Yeah. We have to. Last question. Only last question.
By Baha Shah Zafar.
Thank you. Last question. Shuddha. Yeah. Last question.
We can do two questions. Let's do
Yeah.
two questions.
Sorry.
Take both of them.
No, that can't be done. You ask them, please.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Anant Foundation and the panelists here for their fruitful talk. My name is Arfara. I'm from CISA, one of the CISA fellows at Coach. I initially had two questions, one from Katia, one from Nikhil, but I think you asked one of my questions. Just coming from Iran, which you technically have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom after speech. I just wanted to know that's basically the case. Like, what are the challenges that the artists are facing within the countries around the Persian Gulf? That was that was the question, and I think what you are doing is very important. I think in archiving and like presenting the documentations of the projects that are ephemeral and they wouldn't see the light of day if you don't like present them in such spaces, and we wouldn't have any idea that it happened. Not just because of the archiving part, but because of the fact that you are creating legitimacy and validation for these alternative ways of creating art projects. And my question from Nikhil, which I initially wanted to say it's a weird question, but since you talked about exorcism and monsters, it's not going to look weird. have you thought of your practice and its relation to demonology and demonic practices? Because I mean it in a good way, in a sense that the demon is essentially the very first figure, not in human history, but in inhuman history, that defied the imposed boundaries by the main narrative, the main narrator, which is the god, and basically started the canon of defying the norm, which is something that you are doing. So I've thought about it, because I don't think you are a Fëanor. You're more like a demonic figure, because Fëanor is just a passive observer, but demon intervenes, and that's what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, please, Katia. Yeah, Nikhil.
I mean, I would treat that as I wouldn't really necessarily treat that as a question. I would treat that as a comment, because I completely align myself with what it is that you're saying, because unless we're not able to bring these demons out, we're not able to confront critical aspects of what it is that we want to discuss. Because it's not from a place of reverence that I'm interested in looking at what I do, but from a place of irreverence. So it's very important for me to create the king, but it's also very important for me to create the demon, right? And also kind of highlight the demonicness of power, and how do we dismantle that? So yeah, it's actually, I'll thank you for saying that.
Yeah.